Hi, I'm Steph, and today I want to talk to you about what I think is the best adaptation of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. But before that, real quick, thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support. I'm just kind of getting started with this YouTube stuff, and so having you watch my video means a lot to me, so thank you. All right, so let's talk about A Christmas Carol. Quick disclaimer, I mostly don't like Charles Dickens. Seriously, I just don't. For a few years, I worked as a librarian, and I thought that maybe I should read some of the books and authors that are considered standards and classics. So I slogged through like Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I found just dreadfully dull. I read a couple of Jane Austen books, which I don't even remember. That's how unimpressed I was with them. And I dragged my brain through Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. My daughter had to read Oliver Twist when she was in high school, and she had a similar experience to mine. We both found Dickens novels to just be like headache-inducing and just really difficult to enjoy. And maybe this means we're just kind of spoiled on stories that move along at a faster pace. I don't know. I can read slower paced stories. They just have to be really engaging. For some reason, I just couldn't get into Dickens. That being said, though, I do love A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol is a short story, not a novel, and it's far more enjoyable to read. I love that the first line of the story says, "Marley was dead," to begin with. I love a good grim story, and to begin a Christmas tale with paragraphs about how the author and the leading character were confident that Marley was really dead is just deliciously dark. So A Christmas Carol is in the public domain, so you can find it online for free to read. I recommend checking out Project Gutenberg if you want to read it. I'll include a link in the description to one of the versions on Project Gutenberg. It's an ebook, and that version has some illustrations that were scanned and included, so that's kind of cool. There are a lot of different versions have been printed of the story with different illustrations, some without illustrations, and you can get, a pretty cheap paperback copy online, or maybe even at a thrift store if you're lucky. So A Christmas Carol has been made into many films and animated shorts. The Wikipedia page for all the film versions includes, I think, 50 versions that include the shorts like Mickey's Christmas Carol, The Smurfs, The Flintstones, Bugs Bunny, Mr. Magoo, and others. The film versions date back to 1908, but apparently there's no existing copy of that version. It didn't survive. And it's been remade and remade and remade. Even this year, there is a big star version just recently released starring Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds that's called Spirited. I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to weigh in on it. Some people really love the 1988 Bill Murray version that's called Scrooged. And they even had Jim Carrey voice a hideously animated version in 2009. So it's out there, and there are a lot of different takes on the story. Most film buffs probably choose the George C. Scott version as the standard or as the best version, or one of the other older films. But my favorite adaptation, hands down, is The Muppet Christmas Carol. And I'll tell you why. So the runtime of this film is about an hour and a half, so it's just long enough to get the whole story told, but short enough that kids can stay engaged, as if that was ever in doubt, this being the Muppets. So the film was made in 1992, which was just 2 years after Jim Henson's death. And it was directed by his son, Brian Henson, who went on to direct, I think, Muppet Treasure Island and Muppets in Space also. I have a soft spot for the Muppets, as do many Gen Xers. And speaking of Jim Henson and the Muppets, I recommend that you check out the playlist of videos about Jim Henson by Defunctland. I'll include a link to that in the description. He does a really thorough biography of Henson and talks about the Muppets and their evolution and how they became what we know them to be now. It's well worth your time to watch all 6 videos in the playlist. They're really well done. He does his research. He does a good job. All right, so back to the Muppet Christmas Carol. So the film opens as the credits roll and the camera pans over a snow-dusted gingerbread cookie version of Dickensian London, and a medley of some of the upcoming musical themes plays. I love that they credit the Muppet characters playing the parts, like it says the great Gonzo as Charles Dickens. I think that's really fun. Obviously in the end credits you get the names of the people who did the voices and the puppetry, but I think that's cool that they credited the Muppets. So on the street we see Muppets and humans, as well as human Muppets, alongside horse-drawn wagons and food sellers' carts. And the camera finally pans over and lands on Gonzo as Dickens with his sidekick Rizzo the Rat. And Gonzo begins telling the story of A Christmas Carol. In true Muppet style, there are a lot of humorous moments along the way, such as when Rizzo tries to give Gonzo a hard time about being a blue furry Charles Dickens who hangs out with a rat, but Gonzo, of course, doesn't get his feelings hurt because that's just how Gonzo is. The Muppets do take a few liberties with the story. One change that they make is that instead of one Marley, they have Statler and Waldorf playing the Marley brothers, and it works in the context of this version. It does stay fairly true to the source material, though, and a lot of the lines are lifted straight from the original text, which I just really love. So Michael Caine makes his entrance as Scrooge, and he walks around a dimly lit corner, and he's nearly silhouetted in the gloom, and the Scrooge song begins. This is probably my favorite song in the show. As you would expect with early Muppet productions, the songs are all original, and not only do they capture the feeling of the story and the characters and the setting, they're also kind of surprising and humorous when that's called for, and then they take a more serious tone when that's required by the story. So Scrooge walks through the streets, and as he's walking, Muppet characters tell us about how he charges outrageous rents to very poor people. He has no mercy for them. He's grim and mean and selfish, and how he loves money, and that he just has lived alone for so long that his heart is cold. So we get all the necessary exposition without even really realizing it. It's so well done.
Scrooge is getting worse. Every day in every way, Scrooge is getting worse.
So Michael Caine, I think, is absolutely perfect in the role. He's harsh, he's uncaring, he's selfish, he mistreats his employees, and he disregards his nephew's kindness. I love that Caine is an award-winning serious actor, but even when he's cast with a bunch of Muppets, he doesn't flinch. Like, he plays it completely honest and straight. He's superb, and ultimately we end up feeling a lot of sympathy for him, and we totally believe his change of heart by the end of the story. So after his introduction, Scrooge enters his office, where Bob Cratchit, played by Kermit the Frog, and his clerks, that are played by Muppet Rats, they beg him for more coal for the fire because they're really, really freezing and they're having trouble working. But Scrooge just threatens to fire them all. And a little while later, Kermit convinces Scrooge to give them the next day off of work because it will be Christmas Day. And this is a scene that lifts a bunch of lines from the book. Scrooge says, "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," which is a direct quote. There are a few changes from the original text, such as that when he leaves his office, Scrooge doesn't have dinner in his usual tavern. Instead, they choose to emphasize his lonely life by having him go home, where, of course, he's faced with the specter of one of the Marley brothers on his door knocker. And at first this startles him, but then he dismisses it with a humbug and goes in to eat a plate of bread and cheese by the fire alone in his very dimly lit rooms. He's such a cheapskate that he doesn't even light enough candles to light the room. So late in the night, a bell rings, and soon the ghosts of the Marleys appear, and they sing this jaunty song called Marley Marley, in which they tell about why they're in chains and how Scrooge is doomed if he doesn't change his ways. So they warn him that he will be visited by 3 spirits, and then of course they fade away. Gonzo and Rizzo offer some really good comic relief that balances out the spooky, serious nature of this scene. And then we jump a little bit ahead in time to the visit of the first spirit. And I'm sure you all know the story, but I'm just going to talk about how the Muppets do the things that they do in the film. So the Ghost of Christmas Past, of course, shows up, and she's like a child. She's like a wispy, angelic-y looking child. She shows Scrooge visions of himself in his childhood, alone, staying at the boarding school when other children go home for the holidays, and of course in his teen years. And I'm going to show you a very, very short clip to avoid any kind of copyright problem. This is one of my favorite jokes in the movie, as Sam the Eagle, playing Scrooge's headmaster, is telling him about how, like, making his future in business and why that's a good idea.
It is the American way.
Sam. It's just...
Oh, it is the British way.
Good.
So the spirit, the ghost of Christmas past, then shows Scrooge the memory of himself as a young man, who loses the woman that he loved because he kept putting off their wedding in favor of building his business, and he felt like he would never have enough money, or he would never be set up enough to justify marrying her. And so she ends up leaving. And Cain tears up when he's watching this scene, and he asks the spirit why she delights in showing him these things. And the spirit reminds him that she did not create these images. They're the shadows of things that have been. She says that they are what they are. Do not blame me. So Scrooge tells her just to leave him, and he sits down on a wall and drops his head, and then he's returned to his bedroom. So the clock strikes 2, and he is visited by a much more cheerful spirit, the fun-loving, charming ghost of Christmas Present, who is a great big Muppet, like full costume Muppet. So his memory is a little faulty because he lives only in the present, which is always changing and always ending, like the present doesn't last. So he sings the song, It Feels Like Christmas, and he takes Scrooge around London. He shows him Bob Cratchit's family and Tiny Tim, of course, and Scrooge gets the idea that this family really loves each other and how much they mean to each other and what a good man Bob Cratchit is. And of course, you know, Tiny Tim, his death is sort of foretold if things don't change for the family because he's got health problems. So Cain does a really, really good job of showing his character's development and how these visits like change his heart. There's one vision of the Christmas Present where we see his nephew and a group of his friends playing a guessing game where it's kind of like a 20 questions kind of game where they guess about what he's thinking of. And so they guess that I think his wife ends up coming up with the answer that an unwanted creature that's not a rat, a leech, or a cockroach must be Ebenezer Scrooge, and everybody laughs. And it surprises me how this doesn't cause Scrooge to be angry or resentful, but instead it makes him stop and think. And I love that because I think a lot of us, you know, are prideful and would be so insulted that we would lose sight of the point of the vision, but Scrooge doesn't. He looks like, although it's hurting him, it's hurtful, he is beginning to see why people might think of him that way. He's beginning to realize what he's created by the way he's lived his life. So the ghost of Christmas Present begins to age really quickly, and then he fades away in this twinkling of light, leaving Scrooge alone in a deserted churchyard. And then the ominous Reaper-like ghost of Christmas Yet to Come arrives. And Gonzo and Rizzo declare this is just too scary, and they're going to leave, but they'll be back for the finale. So it's kind of a fun little moment. The spirit does not speak, of course, but he directs Scrooge where to walk. And so Scrooge overhears a cluster of Muppet pigs discussing the death of a much hated unnamed man. And then he sees a group of other characters that are haggling over the stolen bed curtains and possessions of that deceased man. And then he witnesses the Cratchit family grieving the loss of Tiny Tim. And in spite of the actors being Muppets, I get choked up every year when I see that scene. The soundtrack and the dialogue and the acting they're just right. It's so well done. And so, of course, as the story goes, Scrooge is asking the spirit, who was the man? Who was the man? I mean, obviously we know who it was, and he probably does too, but he still kind of wants to deny that could be what he had become. And then he's shown his gravestone, which answers the question for him of whose death would bring so much happiness to other people. and he begs to know if these things he has seen are set in stone or if they can be changed. And of course the spirit doesn't respond, and we cut to Scrooge on his knees, and he's begging for the chance to change and promising to be a better man from now on. Of course, we get the scene of him asking the boy in the street what day it is and giving him money to go buy the big turkey in the butcher's window. And the story wraps up, as you know it does, with him going to Bob Cratchit's house with the turkey and promising him a raise and complete change of heart. In this version, Michael Caine and the Muppet cast sing the song Thankful Heart, followed by the finale, which is When Love Is Found. And Caine is not really like a Broadway caliber singer, but he can sing, and what he does in this performance is perfect for the character of Ebenezer Scrooge. I don't dare play too many clips with sound, obviously, because of the copyright stuff. But the soundtrack is on Spotify, most of it. Some of them are blocked, and I'm not sure what that means, if there was like a copyright was revoked or something. But most of the soundtrack is on Spotify, and the film is on Disney Plus. It's also available on DVD and Blu-ray, which is how I have it. And so I really recommend that if you haven't seen it before, or if you haven't seen it for years, go check it out. It's such a great show, and you can watch it with your kids. Depending on their sensitivity, obviously you might not want to show it to really young kids, but you know, I would think most school-age kids and up would enjoy it. So in my opinion, this is one of the best Muppet productions, right up there with the original Muppet movie. And this is like my favorite adaptation of A Christmas Carol. The script like clicks along at a brisk pace, and it's peppered with enough humor that it keeps the viewers engaged. The music manages to be sweet when it needs to be and warm-hearted without crossing the line to excessive sentimentality. The sets, I think, are perfect. The costumes, the lighting, the staging, and the puppetry. There are a lot of scenes that are kind of a little darker, and it's done for effect, and it works really, really well. And as for the puppetry, I'm always kind of blown away by how the Muppets manage to seem real, even though we all know they're basically just felt puppets. We all watch Kermit, and we fully believe that he's talking to us. So that's just kind of the magic of Jim Henson's creations, and I love that the Henson Studios went on to produce movies such as this one, even after he died. I think it's a great honoring of his legacy. So anyway, so those are my thoughts. I'm curious what you think, which is your favorite adaptation of this story, whether you agree with me or not, and what do you love about it. So maybe leave me a comment, share this video, like this video, all that YouTube stuff. If you like this video, maybe think about subscribing to my channel, and have a wonderful holiday season.